Welcome to the last module in how to play aggressively pre-flop and dominate aggressive players. Congratulations on getting to the last part of this month's training. This is module 4, how to 4-bet. Now, if you've started doing the exercises and you've been back over the other modules a couple of times, you already know how much of a difference a little bit more understanding and just being a little bit more aggressive pre-flop can make. And we've also already made a lot of references to 4-betting, so finally we're going to get to learn how to do it. Now, I'm sure you've all done this at different points. I'm sure you've done it with, aces, kings, perhaps the odd bluff, whatever. But how much thought have you put into when you should be doing it, I wonder? You definitely probably are not doing it enough, and you're probably not mixing up when you do it with a big hand and when you bluff enough. There is some fantastic advice and an amazing tip for playing pre-flop from Kevin in this module. I know I've said that for all of the stuff, but I mean, I've loved the content he's given us. This is probably saving the best till last. So let's get into some basics of 4-betting then. And always like to start with mindset, and I want you to have the mindset that 4-betting is not a big deal. It's actually easy. No, really, no, it is actually easy. It's a lot less complicated than a lot of other concepts in poker, because it should be quite a black or white situation. And what I mean by that is you should either be 4-betting for value or as a bluff. So either you're 4-betting because you think you have the best hand. Usually you're going to be prepared to get all of your money in once you 4-bet. Very rarely we're playing so deep stack that wouldn't be the case. Or you're 4-betting as a bluff. And you're basically going to be polarized, so I'm sure you've heard that term by now, just in case you haven't. That means polarized to doing it for something for value or doing something for a bluff, so doing it with your very strong hands and weak hands. Polarizing is good generally until you play very strong players, actually, and that's certainly true here. So against players who will call 4-bets, you can value bet more hands. So this is just a note because you will play some players, especially in live events early in tournaments, who will call 4-bets with hands like, 8s, 9s, ace, queen or whatever, just because they don't want to throw them away. So you can 4-bet a few more hands for value. And then the other flip side to that, if you like, which we touched on in a previous module, was that against aggressive players who 3-bet too much, you can 4-bet bluff more. And that's about it. See, it is easy. I never, ever lie to you. So you just probably need to do it a bit more than you are right now. Now, I don't need to go crazy. You don't want to be 4-betting too much. Again, I don't really want to get into numbers, but you can have a look on PokerStove and see the top 2% of hands is roughly, jacks or better and ace king. That's kind of a normal 4-betting range, but it will change based on the situation. Again, we're going to have the same attacking mindset, which is when you're 3-bet, ask, can I 4-bet here? That should be the first question when you're planning what to do. And hopefully you thought about it ahead, because here's the last bit, which is always true, isn't it? You can almost write these modules, or this bit of them anyway yourself now. Plan your 4-bets early. So when you start off a hand by raising, you should be thinking about who could re-raise you, and thinking about which aggressive players could re-raise you that you're already going to 4-bet as a bluff. Now, don't panic too much if you're not quite sure how and when to make these 4-bet bluffs. We have sort of laid the groundwork for this in earlier modules, so go back over that in terms of dealing with aggressive players. But it is an opportunity to 4-bet when you get re-raised in a lot of spots. Sometimes with aggressive players will do it with nothing, but also with players that play too tight. So there's a big opportunity with a lot of players, especially in live events, lower levels online, because you remember when we were talking to Kevin about, and he was warning against turning 3-bet hands into bluffs by folding them when you get re-raised again, 4-bet. Well, you should be taking advantage of that. If you've got players that will re-raise a hand like 9s, but then fold it when you 4-bet, well, then you can 4-bet them, pretty mercilessly if they're going to fold, big hands. So you want to be looking out for those players that play too tight or make that error of 3-betting and then folding when they 4-bet. Okay, let's look at the nuts and bolts of making 4-bets. So let's look at 4-bet sizing and continuing if you ever get called when you make a 4-bet. So I know there's sometimes a little bit of difficulty with knowing how big to make four bets, and very often I see players make them too large. That's the temptation. It's actually a peculiar bet size in a lot of spots for a couple of reasons, in that your four bets should actually be smaller than most other bets you make pre-flop. So standard is actually about 2.5 times, or possibly even smaller, depending on your opponent and the stack sizes. But your four bets should be smaller than previous bets. So just to give you an example before I explain why, if you're playing 10 cent, 25 cent with 100 big blinds, and you're going to make a four bet, so it would go something like we'd open to 75 cents, we get three bets to a standard $2.25. In that situation, our four bet should be between $4.50, which is just a doubling of the three bet, which you're probably going to usually bet more towards the upper range that I've put on there. Somewhere around the 550 mark is probably going to be about right for a standard four bet. Now, the reason that it's going to be closer to 2.5 times the last raise than 3 times or 3.5 times is because of the stack to pot ratio being smaller. So to explain that, more money's being put in the middle, which means the pot's getting bigger, the stacks are getting smaller, and that ratio is going down. And that has a couple of practical implications. The first one is if you make a bigger four bet, then you can be priced in to call a shove from your opponent, even if you're bluffing. So let's say you make a four bet bluff with 8 high, 8-7 or something, or 8-6, or whatever, and you get shoved on. If you've put kind of 35% of your chips in on a four bet bluff, and he's shoved 100% of your chips, the maths work out that you're almost compelled to call. It's actually a mistake to fold, and that's not really a situation you want to be in very often of your own making. The other, arguably bigger implication is that this stack to pot ratio affects your opponent in that it becomes the same decision for them whether you make a small four bet or a big four bet. And what I mean by that is that they will know if they're a good player that they shouldn't be calling your four bet because they're putting in so much money, they're going to be sort of pot committed, and you have the lead and you have the better hand most of the time, and that's not a position you want to be in. So they either have to raise again, which is often a shove, or they have to fold. And that's true whether you bet a small four bet or a big four bet. So in that situation, to do the same job, it just makes sense to put less chips at risk. So that's why you see professional players making small four bets. Hope that sheds a bit of light on it if you hadn't quite got to grips with it. But the main point is that your four bet should be a little bit smaller. And then just to cover off, if your four bets do get called, it shouldn't happen because, as I've just been through, it's not good poker to call a four bet. Almost never. I guess if you get deep stacked and you have aces and you want to do something trappy or whatever, there are situations. But in general, you shouldn't be calling four bets. If you start making four bets at lower limits, you will get them called a decent amount. And live especially, people like to call four bets for some reason. I don't know why. If you do get called, then we're into a post-flop situation where there are a lot of different variables. But the general rule of thumb is that you're going to often want to continue when checked to. And you're often going to want to continue with a small bet. And the reasons for that are probably obvious, but the reasons are you've got the initiative, there's a lot of money out there to win, so even if you're bluffing, you want to take a shot at the pot the vast majority of the time. And you only need a small bet for exactly the same reasons we just talked about. There's a lot of money in the middle, the stack to pot ratio is very low, and you're going to have the same effect whether you make a small bet or a big one, so you might as well make a small one and put less money at risk. Yeah, so it's just I have to be general at this point because there are going to be lots of different types of situations. But in general, if you have the lead in a four bet pot, of course you're going to want to continue because there's so much there to win. Now, as promised, here comes Kevin with some fantastic advice. What I think is one of the best practical tips I've heard for just getting aggressive, getting into that mindset and four betting more often. So I think you're going to really enjoy the practical tip he's got for you. He also talks a bit about using Holder Manager and tracking software for 2 or 3 minutes at the end. It gets a bit technical if you haven't used tracking software too much. I've left it in because I think it's great advice and you should try and experiment with it and mess about with it. If you're not quite ready for that, don't worry too much as long as you get the main message about four betting, but it's there for you as a resource and you may even come back to it one day if you're not ready for it now. But here's some more great stuff from my chat with Kevin McPhee, and it's focused around 4-betting. So here's McPhee on when to 4-bet bluff. So let's talk about 4-betting. Now, this for most people is a really sort of a difficult area, probably because they're just not experienced in doing it. And I think it's still true that if you go to a live tournament, unless you're going to perhaps an EPT main event, you're still not going to see that much 4-betting from non-professional players. So I want to kind of break it down and try and help people to understand what we're trying to achieve, or what we try and do when we get 4-bet.
Yeah, well, I mean, like 4-betting value hands is relatively simple enough. It's a product of understanding the player persona and the stack sizes. But when to 4-bet with air is sort of the great art of poker.
Yes.
Is these 3-betting and 4-betting and 5-betting wars that people get into. And it just comes down to game theory, game flow, and I mean, like, say for example, I open the pot with the antes in. I'm going to open for somewhere between 2 and 2.5 big blinds. Now, if somebody 3-bets me, say I open for 2.5 big blinds, there's the small blind, the big blind, my 2.5, that's 4, plus the blinds and antes, that may be like, 5.5 big blinds in there. So they can 3-bet any 2 cards in position.
Yeah.
And as long as they're making their 3-bet under the size of the pot, so like say they're risking 5.5 big blinds to win 5.5 big blinds, and they're getting folds 75% of the time, then they're just printing money by 3-betting in position. So the way to counteract people that are overusing that sort of math equation is to just 4-bet them and stop the math equation right in its tracks.
Right.
So by the time they put 5.5 bets in, and there's already 5.5 bets in the middle, there's 11 in the middle, and you've already invested your 2.5. So you can make it another 11 bets, and make it 13.5 effective. And it's going to blow them off of all of their airball range, and it's going to allow you to pump a math equation. Basically, you're risking...
Pump a math equation.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it is. I mean, you're risking 11 more big blinds to win the 11 big blinds that are in the middle. And so as long as that works more than half of the time, then you're going to show a profit with that play.
Yeah.
So if you really think somebody's just 3-betting out of control, just every once in a while, just what I do is I hold the amount of chips that are in the pot in one of my hands. I always have the count of what the chips are in the middle.
This is a great tip, by the way.
And I hold that in my hand, and I'll just always think, what happens if I put the size of the pot in the middle? Will this work more than half the time? And if I think it'll work more than half the time,
I'm doing it the next time I play.
Yeah, I mean, I was messing around with it here. Like, guys were opening 25 big blinds in this UK IPT, and there'd be like 5,500 in the middle. I'd just be sitting there looking and be like, okay, well, I'll just grab his 5,500, and I think he's going to fold more than half the time, and I'll just put it in the middle. It doesn't matter what my cards are. Right. If I think he's going to fold them more than half the time, and I'm not going to put any more chips in the pot after this, that's kind of, I guess, part of it, then all I'm strictly doing is risking, these X amount of chips to win X amount of chips. And you can just think of it as a math equation.
Yeah.
How many chips you're risking to win the pot compared to how many chips are in the pot.
Yeah.
And ratio comparison, how often it's going to be successful, will show you if you're going to make a profit or not. So if you have somebody who, like a Jake Cody would be a great example. This guy just 3-bets for fun, you know? And what he's doing is he's pumping a math equation. He knows that when somebody who's tight opens a pot, there's a certain amount of big blinds in the middle. He's going to risk a similar amount of big blinds, and they're going to fold because of the intimidation factor of him. They're going to fold, 70, 80% of the time, so he's just printing money with every 3-bet. So the way to combat that is to do the same thing to him that he's doing to you. And it's not like he's going to be able... it's so hard, go back to our discussion about calling pocket pairs out of position.
Yeah.
It's really hard to flat a 4-bet with something that's crap. So it doesn't matter how big your 4-bet is, really. Like somebody might go 2 big blinds to 6 big blinds, and an amateur player would go 18 big blinds.
Right.
And you're just risking too much. You're making it so your success rate has to be 66% then, because you're risking so many big blinds. So that's why you see these small out of position 4-bet clickbacks, because all they're trying to do is be like, I think you have air, and the way to combat that is I'm going to click it back on you. Now that means that you should click it back with aces and kings. You should click it back with all your really big value hands. But there's a
So
time and place
just
to
in
do it
case
with
there's
nothing.
anyone listening who doesn't click it back, you just mean the minimum raise,
Yeah,
more or less.
minimum raise. Yeah. So like,
Because people would have seen the professional players making these small raises and perhaps not quite understand exactly why they're doing it. I think you've just basically explained to people exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
It's trying to bet the minimum to make that maths equation work in their favor, basically.
Yeah, and it comes down to stack size management too, because you know that somebody who's 3-betting like a medium strength hand is just simply, if they have 40 or 50 big blinds, is simply not going to have enough bets to be able to profitably flat call 4-bet with something medium strength.
Yeah.
So when you 4-bet them, they're folding out all their medium strength stuff, they're folding out all their air, and you're limiting their range down to only hands they want to get that many chips in with, which is a relatively small range, especially when you're playing against a good player. If they're 3-betting a large percentage, you got to assume that a very small percentage of what they're doing is actually value hands.
Yes.
And so if they're just getting out of control with their frequencies, you just re-raise them. Re-raise them. And then if they 5-bet, you just fold and just be like, that's almost a better way to draw a line in the sand than if you have 50 big blinds and you're sitting there with an aggressive player on your left. So many people combat it by just playing tight until they're down to 20 big blinds and they can shove on them.
Right.
But when you're at 50 big blinds, the first time they 3-bet you, just 4-bet them. Just 4-bet them and then take the amount of chips that are in the pot, keep it in your hand, and when they 3-bet you, you take that amount of chips that are in the pot and you put it in front of you. You don't take your bet out, and you're risking exactly that amount to win what's in the middle, and just see if it works more than half the time. Just try it out. It could be, you could try it down at a tournament online, you could try it down at your pub game, you could try it like anywhere.
Yeah.
Just try to pump this math equation where you're 4-betting the size of the pot to try to win more than half the time.
It's a fantastic tip. And by trying it, you'll eventually get used to how people react to it and when you should be doing it.
Exactly.
And that's the way to improve at it.
I mean, it's not like Jake Cody just was born, and maybe he was born to know how to 3 and 4-bet right. But
I think Jake's a bad example
kids,
because he was clearly born on Mount Sinai. And
But I mean, like so many of these young, aggressive, especially UK players, I mean, they're so good about knowing the game tempo, the game flow, knowing when to 3-bet and 4-bet. And it's just because they practiced. They tried it. They tried it and failed lots and lots of times before they got to the point where they figured out how to make it work. And the number one thing is just to try new things. Try to experiment. If you're, if you think something sounds cool and you pick it up from one of these interviews or pick it up from reading a hand history or pick it up from one of your friends, you always try new things out and work it into your game. So definitely try out keeping the size of the pot in your hand, and then just trying to stick it in every once in a while when you think it's going to get a fold more than 50% of the time. Because then you're going to be printing money.
It's a fantastic tip, and people need to do that. But not too many people because it's hard to play against. Just to finish off 4-betting, I do see people sometimes do what they do with 3-bets, and they have a hand like 9s or 10s or something like that, and they get 4-bet, and it's a good player 4-betting them, and they look at the pot and they go, well, I could call because it's not too much to call, and I know that that's not great, but just to explain to people why that's just such a no-no, because it is tempting when somebody puts a small 4-bet out and you have a hand of value, but you've got a big stack or something, you don't want to just stack off.
Well, I mean, it's just pretty obvious, like, we don't hit the flop that often with hands. Every poker player has to deal with it. It's not just you thinking that you're unlucky not hitting flops, but like King Queen is only going to flop a pair like a third of the time. You're only going to flop a set 1 and 8.5 times with a pocket pair. It's just people miss the flop so often that calling large chunks of your stack pre-flop, just praying to like smash a flop, is basically just giving up a whole bunch of value. But like, yeah, I mean, but going back to the original point about 3-betting, like if you're not prepared to get in all your chips with 9s to begin with, you shouldn't be 3-betting it in the first place. Like, there are spots and opponents where you might take something like 3s or 9s or whatever, and you might flat it. But then there's other opponents where you know that their 4-bet frequency is going to be high enough that you can 3-bet to 5-bet, and that's kind of the art of it.
Yeah.
And you'll learn that as you try experimenting with 3-betting light, as you try experimenting with 4-betting light, and as you do that more, you'll kind of learn when's good spot and when's a bad spot to do it.
Definitely.
But the fundamental thing of how to deal with opens and how to deal with 3-bets of just flatting your medium strength hands will keep you out of those problems of like, what do I do once I have 3-bet 9s and now somebody 4-bets me? Well, if you should have had a plan. The idea is always have a plan. If you're 3-betting something, you premeditated what's going to happen if he 4-bets you, what's going to happen, what kind of flop textures you're going to continue on if he calls out of position. All of these kind of stuff should be going through your head before you even do your first move in the pot.
Right.
You should always be looking a couple of moves down the road, like a chess player or something.
Yes.
So you should always have a plan of what you're going to do with the hand. Say, like, if you do take 9s and 3-bet it, I would never 3-bet fold a hand like that. Unless some ridiculous amount of action happened, like somebody called 4-bet and the original raiser 5-bet, then now I'm folding. But like,
right.
But like, I 3-bet a guy and they 4-bets me, I'm just like, oh, 9s are no good. No, I'm not ever going to do that, because I already had the plan that I was, by 3-betting it, I was going to go with the hand. And if I wasn't going to go with the hand, then I wouldn't have 3-bet it in the first place. So just making sure that you're adhering to those rules is going to like keep you out of so much trouble, because you're never going to be knowing you're never going to be like in the dark about what to do with a medium strength hand.
Yeah.
Because you've already premeditated it.
Yeah.
You already decided when he opened, okay, I'm just going to call and keep his range wide. Or he's a crazy maniac, he might 4-bet me, so I'll 3-bet to 5-bet with this hand. And that's the beauty of poker, is learning how to deal with these frequencies, learning how to deal with the stack sizes, and learning how to deal with other personalities at the table.
And always having a plan is a great tip. Very last question, Kevin, just to kind of round off for people, because I think we've covered everything really well. But I'm just interested in when you play online and use of a HUD for the stuff that we've been talking about. How much does that help you to make these decisions, and how much are you just relying on kind of game flow and your own experience of the players?
Well, I mean, as far as like pumping the math equations, the HUD is the most important thing.
Right.
If it folds to me on the button and the two guys in the blinds are playing extremely tight statistics with almost no 3-bet percentage, then I'm going to open almost 100% of hands on the button, because I know if I open for min raise, it has to work less than half of the time to show a profit. And then there's also the other times where they call and check fold flops too. So it's incredibly profitable to be able to attack tight players' blinds, to be able to 3-bet people that are playing a really high steal percentage and have a high fold 3-bet percentage. So yeah, the HUD is unbelievably like useful. It's so useful. It is what the HUD is what I'm trying to work out in my mind all the time when I'm sitting at a live poker table.
Right.
I'm trying to think about people's frequencies, what their VPIP, what their steal percentage, what their 3-bet percentage, what their fold 3-bet percentage is. That I'm always trying to think about that.
So you'd have those, you'd have steal percentage, fold to 3-bet percentage, 3-bet percentage. You'd have those up on your HUD.
Yeah, my HUD is basically VPIP, which is like just voluntary money put in the pot.
How often they play hands if you've never used one.
Their pre-flop raise percentage, their steal percentage, their 3-bet percentage, and then I have like a little bit of more detail I can go into, and usually when I go into more detail, it's kind of like continuation bet frequency and fold to 3-bet frequency. You can get some really nice stats on the guys, and if you look, this comes back to the math equation thing. If you look at somebody's fold to 3-bet percentage and it's over 50%, and their steal is really, really high, then you can like realistically 3-bet them with any cards and show a profit. And unless they're adapting their 4-bet range right, then you're showing a profit with that all the time. So if you do have a HUD and you're looking for new ways to experiment with opens, with just pumping these pre-flop math equations, then the thing to do is to take 3-bet fold blinds against people with extremely high steal and extremely high fold to 3-bet, because you're just going to show a profit, and attack the blinds of people with like, say, if somebody has 6% or lower, I would say 3-bet percentage, then I would assume they're only 3-betting value hands.
Yeah.
If they're only 3-betting value hands and they're not defending, then it's extremely profitable to raise their blinds from the button with really any cards. But the thing is, once people start getting a high VPIP, start getting a low fold 3-bet percentage, those are really bad people to 3-bet. So you see like a loose guy at the table, he's playing like 34, 20, 13, you're like, this guy's crazy, I'm going to 3-bet him. But you got to realize that guy's probably not folding to 3-bets. You got to look at his fold 3-bet percentage to know if you're going to show a profit. And he's going to make your life misery if you're 3-betting him light, because he's just not going to fold.
Right.
So, like, 3-betting loose players that don't fold light is a bad proposition, because they're just not going to fold anything.
Yeah.
The people to 3-bet light are the really tight players. Actually, it's kind of counterintuitive to like 3-bet a tight player light rather than like a loose player. it doesn't really make sense.
But because the type player, you'll be able to play perfectly.
Yeah, because what you're looking at, the real key statistic is the fold to 3-bet percentage. So that's pretty much one of the only percentages, that and steal are the only percentages that matter when you're trying to 3-bet somebody light. If somebody has extremely high steal percentage, but as like 12% or 20% fold to 3-bet, then what's the point of 3-betting a light? You just sit there and wait for a good value hand. And those are the type of players actually I might even consider if ever 3-betting with something like ace jack. If the guy just never folds to 3-bet, then his range is exactly the same as it was by flatting, except you're just bloating the pot with a better hand in position. So there are some times where you might want to 3-bet somebody with a medium strength hand if their VPIP is like insanely high and the fold to 3-bet percentage is extremely low. Then you can take more medium strength hands and 3-bet them in position. Okay. That's also if their 4-bet frequency is really low too.
That's fantastic. I think we've got kind of deep into how to do this, and
the HUD stuff is fun, and it's something I'm still trying to learn. Like I basically just got going on it a couple years ago. I never had a HUD for years.
Oh, really? Wow.
But I got Richard Grace, RJM Grace, the New Zealand giant, got me hooked up on it. And there's just like infinite amount of stuff that you can do with Hold'em Manager, and if you can get into it and get into the statistics and get into the forums on the like Hold'em Manager or Poker Tracker website to learn how to process information more, that will be a huge help. And there's really just infinite information out there about all that stuff.
Even just the stuff you just told us about falling to 3% and like using that to inform that when you can take advantage of the math equation in your favor. I think that's incredibly helpful for people.
Yeah.
But I think this has all been awesome. But I'm going to let you pack now.
Okay.
Because I know that you have a taxi. But thank you so much, Kevin.
Okay.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
Great stuff from Kevin. He really did have a taxi. Absolutely no idea if he put real trousers on or not there. I hope you found that a really interesting insight. I know the HUD stuff was going back to some 3-betting stuff and kind of didn't quite fit into the 4-betting module, but I thought it would be really good to just have it in there, and fascinating to play around with, and also interesting to hear Kevin say that he takes the mentality of figuring out a player's frequencies and thinks about that at the live game. That's something for you to conjure with as well, and I'm going to try and start doing that, as well as the 4-betting tip of holding the chips in your hand, or just put the number in the online box is really, really great tip. Fantastic stuff, I think. Okay, so we've been talking about 4-betting this module. Let's look at a hand example just to make sure we're all on the same page, and just to kind of look at the good things that happen when you 4-bet bluff. So we'll keep it in tournaments, as we've just been talking about them. It obviously applies to cash as well. Let's say you're early in an MTT, which stands for multi-table tournament. Thank you. I added in that thank you. There shouldn't be an extra T. We're playing 50-100 with 11,500 chips, so 115 big blinds. It's folded to you on the button, and you hold 10-8 of hearts, a very worthy hand on the button, and you make it 250 to play. And the small blind, a reasonably aggressive player, 3-bets to 800. So he's made a pretty standard size 3-bet. We know that he's not just 3-betting aces. You know, he's capable of 3-betting decent hands and understands that we're opening on the button with a lot of hands. So this is a good spot to make a 4-bet bluff. So we're going to turn our hand into a bluff. We're going to 4-bet. We're going to make it 20-50. You could make it slightly less or slightly more. 20-50 seems reasonable to me. And again, I only show you things with a happy ending because I like to bring joy and light into your life. So many good things can now happen. Often it's an instant win, and this is of course the main reason we're making this bet, which is that we're going to get a lot of folds and win instantly, and it's a big win. It's 12 big blinds, I think. So that is a really significant win if we just pick up the pot uncontested. And against many players, until you start playing, you know, against kind of poker superstars who will 5-bet bluff, you will get a lot of instant wins. People don't really want to play in 4-bet pots. 4-betting is more prevalent than it was 3 or 4 years ago, but still, you're going to find this really effective at a lot of limits, live and online. And often you're going to get that instant win. And the interesting thing is, you'll get an instant win even if people don't give you that much credit. And maybe you can relate to this, being in this situation yourself, where you 3-bet from the blinds and the buttons 4-bet you. And even if you think he's, at it, in quotes, it's really tough to do anything. Because if you're going to rebluff him, you're going to have to put 4,000 chips at stake in this example, 40% of your chips, so you better be right. It's a big risk to take. So very often players will fold even if they think that you're bluffing. So it's a very profitable play. I've made it out there, if they 5-bet, it's a safe fold. That's true unless you're playing Benny Spindler or Jay Cody, in which case adjust accordingly. And if they do make the mistake of calling, you have a huge advantage post-flop. I've seen a lot of players do this a lot. Watching the UK Poker Tour, you see it a lot. People have hands like pocket tens or something, and they think it's so strong they don't want to fold, but they don't quite want to stack off for 120 blinds, so they call out of position in a 4-bet pot. If you've been listening to all these modules, you'll know by now that's a no-no, and you'll also know by now that if you're the 4-better, you have a great advantage. You have the lead, you have position in this example. You're just going to win a ton of money if they call. So just an example to bring to life the idea of 4-bet bluffing. But that's not enough. I want to make sure you use it in your game. So let's look at some steps that you can take. Steps, if you like, to 4-betting glory. So we're going to play the 4-bet every time your 3-bet game. Now this one I'm going to say definitely play at a lower level than your normal game, because you're not going to play like this normally. But for 2 sessions, try it a couple of times. You have to 4-bet small, so the min raise back, you just click it back or a little bit more every time you're 3-bet. So you must do it, okay? There's no decision involved. Now I'm doing this and getting you to this for a couple of reasons. The first is to make it feel more normal, because as Kevin brilliantly pointed out, nobody's born knowing how to do this. You have to learn how to do it and make it normal in your brain. So that's the first reason to do it. The second reason is it will start to give you an idea of how players react to being 4-bet, which again will normalise it in your play, but also start to give you a bit of experience of how to adjust to how people react to it. So try that game for a couple of sessions. I think you'll enjoy it. I think you'll have a lot of fun with it. Now, the second step is going to be in your normal game, and this is going to be to 4-bet as a bluff the same amount as you 4-bet for value. Now, as a rule of thumb, I think that's going to probably be a little bit excessive most of the time. I hate giving definitive numbers, but you're probably not going to want to 4-bet bluff quite that much once you settle down into it. But just for now, in your regular game, increase your 4-bet bluffing until it's equal to your 4-betting for value. If you're tracking your play online, you can actually see the numbers. If you're playing live or you don't have an online HUD, just keep 2 columns and note down once every time that you 4-bet for value and once every time you 4-bet for bluff. And over the next 5 or 6 sessions, try and make those 2 numbers pretty equal. And really study each 4-bet spot after each session. Now, every time you do this, you are making the pot bigger. These are significant pots, and you should pay some attention to them. And I just want to make sure that you're getting into the habit of 4-bet bluffing. If it's not new to you after with this month's coaching, I'm sure you haven't been doing it a huge amount, because not too many people do it a ton until you get to the higher levels. So yeah, I think those 2 exercises will really help make it more normal for you. And that's all I've got for you this month. Pretty intense, some quite technical stuff, some more technical than some months, but I think we have to get into some theory, because it's important, especially if you're going to be aggressive and have confidence with it, that you know why you're doing it. So I wanted to break that down for you, and I think Kevin was fantastic in helping us understand how a top pro looks at this. And I really hope, and I really have a lot of belief that if you go through these exercises and go through the modules again, it's going to give you a massive amount of confidence and turn you into a much more aggressive player and really transform your pre-flop game. Hope you've enjoyed it, and I'll see you soon for some more quality coaching. Run good and take care.